The unexplained phenomenon of mass hysteria, when crowds lose control. In our age of data, science, and global connectivity, it's easy to believe that we've outgrown superstition and irrational fear. But mass hysteria, also known as mass psychogenic illness, remains a chilling reminder that the human mind is still susceptible to deep, unconscious forces. This phenomenon occurs when a group of people start experiencing similar symptoms, physical or emotional, with no identifiable medical cause. It's not about being gullible. It's about how fear, stress, and social pressure can ripple through entire communities and override logic. These outbreaks can look like epidemics, possessions, curses, or miracles. Yet behind them often lies a perfect storm of tension, trauma, and cultural conditioning. What's truly disturbing is how quickly these events escalate, and how difficult they are to stop once they begin. In this video, we'll examine some of the most compelling real-life cases of mass hysteria, exploring what they reveal about collective psychology and the fragile boundary between reality and belief. 1. The Laughter Epidemic of Tanzania. In January 1962, the students of a missionary boarding school in Kashasha, a remote village near Lake Victoria, began to laugh. At first, it seemed like an innocent burst of joy, but the laughter grew louder, stranger, and more uncontrollable. 3 girls were affected on the first day. By the end of the week, dozens were incapacitated. Their laughter was not playful, it was hysterical, often accompanied by crying, respiratory problems, fainting, and rashes. The school, overwhelmed, was forced to close. What followed was even more shocking. The laughter spread to surrounding villages and other schools, ultimately affecting nearly 1,000 people. The Tanzanian government, along with foreign researchers, investigated the phenomenon. No environmental contaminants, viral outbreaks, or food poisoning were found. Instead, experts concluded it was a case of mass psychogenic illness, a reaction to extreme psychological stress. The newly independent nation was undergoing political and social upheaval, and students were under intense pressure to perform in unfamiliar, westernized education systems. The laughter, bizarrely enough, became a form of emotional release. But it also demonstrated how psychological tension, when unchecked, can take on a life of its own and infect communities like a virus. To this day, the laughter epidemic remains one of the most thoroughly documented cases of mass hysteria. It shows how our emotions can manifest physically when traditional outlets, like communication, counseling, or social support, are blocked. What starts as a psychological tremor in one person can ripple outward into an uncontrollable wave. And sometimes, as in Tanganyika, even something as joyful as laughter can carry a haunting, contagious weight. 2. The Salem Witch Trials. In 1692, the Puritan settlement of Salem Village was engulfed in one of the darkest chapters of colonial American history. It all began when a group of young girls, led by Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, began to exhibit bizarre symptoms: screaming fits, convulsions, hallucinations. They claimed they were being tormented by witches, and as the community searched for answers, they pointed fingers at neighbors, servants, and even respected townsfolk. Their accusations were taken as truth, and the resulting panic led to over 200 arrests and the execution of 20 people. The Salem Witch Trials were not the first or only witch hunt in history, but they are the most iconic. Historians now believe a mix of psychological, environmental, and socio-political factors fueled the hysteria. The Puritans lived under extreme religious pressure, isolation, and fear of the unknown. Some theories suggest that ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus on rye bread, may have contributed to the girls' hallucinations. Others point to long-standing land disputes and gender dynamics as the real source of tension. But regardless of the cause, the mass panic proved that fear, once legitimized, can destroy communities from within. Salem became a cautionary tale about the dangers of groupthink and the consequences of allowing superstition to override justice. Even after the hysteria ended, the damage was irreversible. Families were torn apart, trust was shattered, and the legal system had been twisted into a weapon of paranoia. Today, Salem stands not just as a historic town, but as a symbol of what happens when society turns against itself in search of invisible enemies. And the West Bank fainting episode. In the spring of 1983, a wave of sudden illness swept through the occupied West Bank, starting in a girls' school in the town of Araba. Several students complained of nausea, fainting, and difficulty breathing. The panic quickly spread to surrounding schools. Within days, over 900 individuals, mostly young girls, had been hospitalized. At first, rumors of a chemical or biological attack exploded. Given the political tension between Israelis and Palestinians, such fears were not only plausible, they were expected. Families, already living under intense psychological stress, panicked. Israeli and Palestinian authorities launched independent investigations. Hospitals were flooded with patients. But as samples came back negative for any known toxins or airborne threats, a different conclusion emerged. International health organizations, including the WHO, determined that this was an outbreak of mass psychogenic illness. The fear itself, amplified by rumors, media coverage, and the environment of suspicion, was the true contagion. Under immense social pressure and trauma, the mind began to manifest symptoms of a threat that didn't exist. The West Bank fainting epidemic remains one of the most politically charged cases of mass hysteria. It shows how collective trauma and unresolved conflict can become physically embodied by a population. It also highlights the difficulty of treating such outbreaks, not with medicine, but with empathy, education, and societal healing. In a region still grappling with fear and division, the incident serves as a haunting reminder of the emotional cost of political instability. 4. The Malaysian school possessions. In April 2016, a government school in Kelantan, Malaysia, became the center of a supernatural panic. It started with a few students claiming they had seen shadowy figures or were being choked by unseen forces. Soon, more students began screaming, fainting, and losing control. Teachers caught in the emotional whirlwind were also affected. The school was shut down temporarily, not for scientific inquiry, but to allow spiritual leaders to perform Islamic exorcisms. The crisis, called a mass hysteria outbreak, shocked the nation and drew worldwide attention. Malaysia's multicultural society includes deep-rooted spiritual beliefs, particularly in rural areas. Concepts like hantu, ghosts, or jinn are common explanations for unexplainable symptoms. The outbreak in Kelantan was not just a random event. It was a cultural expression of psychological stress. Academic pressure, strict discipline, and puberty were already straining the students. The first reports of a ghost may have acted as a psychological permission slip, unleashing a wave of collective emotional release. Psychologists later concluded that it was a classic case of mass psychogenic illness, intensified by cultural context. But what made it unique was how traditional beliefs shaped the response. Instead of doctors, priests, and shamans were called, and instead of diagnosis, there was ritual. It's a powerful reminder that how we interpret symptoms can be as important as the symptoms themselves, and that in many societies, the boundary between mental health and spiritual belief is not always clearly drawn. 5. The Dancing Plague of 1518. One summer morning in 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into the streets of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, and began to dance. She didn't stop. Not for food, not for water, not for rest. Within a week, dozens joined her, dancing until their feet bled, until they collapsed, some even until they died. What became known as the Dancing Plague of 1518 quickly spiraled into chaos. City leaders, baffled and desperate, believed more dancing might help and hired musicians to accompany the afflicted. But instead of a cure, it only encouraged the outbreak. Historical records estimate that up to 400 people were caught in this uncontrollable compulsion to dance. Modern historians believe it was likely a form of mass hysteria, fueled by intense societal pressures. Strasbourg had recently suffered famine, disease, and religious turmoil. The people were emotionally, spiritually, and physically exhausted. One theory suggests that the dancing was a subconscious form of protest or stress relief, an unconscious way to cope with despair in an era with little understanding of mental health. Another hypothesis, often repeated but debated, points to ergot, a toxic mold that grows on damp rye and can cause hallucinations. However, this theory doesn't fully explain the prolonged, coordinated nature of the dancing. What's clear is that the incident reveals how trauma and repression can manifest in surreal, even deadly ways. The dancing plague remains a haunting example of how the human mind can rebel against its environment, sometimes in the most unexpected forms. Conclusion. Nildu Hendreds Characters. From laughter in East Africa to ghost sightings in Southeast Asia, these stories prove that mass hysteria is not a relic of the past. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears. Each case, separated by time and geography, shares a common thread: emotional pressure exploding into shared delusion. These aren't simply panic attacks on a mass scale. They are societal signals that something is deeply wrong. When voices aren't heard, when stress is buried, and when belief overrides reason, the mind may look for other ways to cope. And sometimes those ways are contagious. In today's digital world, hysteria doesn't need a village. It just needs a screen. Social media can spread mass panic faster than any plague. So next time you witness viral outrage, urban legends, or sudden group behavior, ask yourself, is it fact or fear in disguise?